Ian MacKaye actually worked at the store. And I used to go in 12 years old and ask Ian, why did you guys have X's on your hands and like the whole thing? And he used to talk to me, which is so cool. Like he'd spend a lot of time. Store was like, there'd be like two other people in the store. It was very laid back. And he would just talk to me for like forever.
Welcome, everyone, to This Was The Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. Before we start, feel free to support the podcast if you've been listening for a long time by signing up at my Patreon. It's patreon.com/thiswasthescene. It's only $1 a month, and that's $12 a year. And as I typically say, it's like not buying 3.5 Starbucks coffees this year. If you love the podcast, go check that out. Matt Squire is known for producing and writing pop and rock music. He's a knack for discovering underground artists and helping them refine their sound. Prior to producing, Squire was in numerous bands such as Ashes, Miltown, the Dubnicks, Long Distance Runner, and the Rise Park. After his band days ended, he went on to produce and songwrite with such names as Underoath, Panic at the Disco, Ariana Grande, Demi Lovato, Sum 41, Simple Plan, All Time Low, Good Charlotte, The Used, Taking Back Sunday, and a shit ton of others. Dave Gorman spoke about his love for Matt in his interview, episodes 152 and 153, so I reached out to Matt, got him on the Skype, and this is what we chat about. Working with Underoath, meeting Ian MacKaye at a young age, his band Miltown, not having any aspirations to become a record producer while in college, his thoughts on living in LA, working with Swedish songwriters, Orange Island, recording Panic at the Disco's first album, and a ton more. Make sure you check out his business ventures at entangledaudio.com and his Bitcoin. It's called Emo Coin. It's over at rally.io. You can just go there and just like Google Emo Coin and it comes right up. So it's his take on getting into the digital crypto space. Lastly, I have a comic, and I put a book out this year called The Couples Checklist. It's at yourdailybread.com. It's BRED. This is a great gift if you're looking for something sweet to give your loved one this holiday season. So you better hurry up and buy it now, because I don't really know how fast the mail is, but it doesn't seem like it's very fast these days. So if you want to get something amazing for that person you love, then go to yourdailybread.com and buy that shit. That's all I got to say, so feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who would love some punk rock nostalgia. With that said, let's get started.
Dude, you're like the most prompt guest that I've had. The fact that you called me 3 minutes early in the almost 4 years I've been doing this, I've never had someone do that. And I was like,
Is that true?
yeah, because I'll call everyone. Everyone's like on time. Like I'll call them around like right at the hour. But the fact that you were calling me prior to this, I was like, holy shit, I'm not even ready. Oh my God, I gotta like get my head set.
Right on. Well, I don't know what to attribute it to. I think I'm like a reformed always late. So now I'm like an always on time. I'm so used to the years of like being like, sorry. Like,
Yeah.
so it's like these days I'm trying to like kick it a little bit more prompt.
Well, I guess it's got to work. You got to be on time when you're on the dollar or the band's dime or the record label's dime to record their shit, right?
It's true, but it's also like I'm very, very, very fortunate with the labels and bands that I work with that it is always been bro and it's always been friendship and so there is an element of professionalism to it all, but I don't feel that hardly ever, and that's the lucky thing about this community is that like it really is a community in that way. I feel fortunate because I've seen a lot of other music communities not behave in this manner, and it's definitely something to be grateful for.
What do you mean in that sense?
I feel like broy with the artists I work with, like the talented people that I get to hang with all the time are like friends and we're in it together. The labels that I work with I feel the same way. So I never feel that like on the clock, under the gun. I do feel pressure to deliver, but that's because it's out of friendship. If it's not good or if it's not meaningful, then it doesn't help my friends. I feel like internal pressure. I feel like it's like a really lucky job in that way because it's not an on the clock. It's not necessary. It's something that I sort of like internalize.
Actually, and I want to get back. I want to go back in time and talk about like the late '90s scene and you growing up in Boston and like
Oh,
being in bands and shit
for
like that.
sure. And dude, I looked through the archives of This Was the Scene, and you have interviewed so many amazing people, and I can't wait to pour through and listen to more of the episodes. It's just, it's an amazing body of work that you're putting together, and I'm really thankful to be here.
Wow, thanks, man. That's there's times I was talking to someone that, I'm sure you get this for so many years of doing what you do where you kind of it comes in waves where you feel like, all right, cool, like I'm on a wave, this is great, and all of a sudden it starts you kind of slow down a little bit and you're like, like when I got sick last week, I just kind of like knocked me out. I'm like, man, I don't know. Like I just wasn't reaching out to people and trying to find interviews, and it slows down, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. But then like you hear stuff like that, and you're like, all right, I'm back on it. Like I'm good, and then I have like a good interview.
The thing about it is like, and maybe being inside it, you don't get to see it. But like when I looked at the archives, I'm just like, what has the internet largely done for culture? Like when I was a kid, there were encyclopedias. If you wanted to know something, you looked it up. Now, the encyclopedia is this like nuclear sized thing,
Yeah.
called the internet. And so I think that what you're memorializing and documenting is special. I lived it, my friends lived it, we loved it. It means so much to us. So I know a lot of my friends would feel the same way, that the fact that it's being so well documented and so well like revered, it's an important thing to leave here. It's a really great thing you're doing. So feel good about it and be stoked about it. And I'm really grateful to be a small part of it.
Dude, that's awesome. No, that's really nice to hear and for you to say that. It's cool because the people, and I'd say this all the time, the people who grew up in that scene, we knew, and it was like, some of us really, some of the people I interviewed were bands, and they were only there for like maybe a couple of years, and then they broke up, went to college and stuff. But there was a piece of that they kept, and there's other people that they started with it, and like someone like yourself, and you started in it, and then we're in a band, and then you're producing records, and like you're still making music to this day. So it's like it's extended over 20 years or into 20 years of you doing this. So people, but we all look back at that beginnings time, and it's still just so gigantic for us, which is just crazy.
100%. And I think it comes back down to that feeling of community and that feeling of just like of being in something together that feels like our own thing. As inclusive as it is, it's still, there's a camaraderie there, and there's like a club that I think was really helpful. We're talking about a lot of people who came from a lot of different backgrounds and with a lot of varying degrees of sadness and depression in their lives, to be frank. And the fact that we were all able to come together and like make it fun is totally amazing. And that all this great music is the testament to it. It's a really cool thing. And so many of my lasting friendships were born out of those shows and out of it's the little moments in between. It's the stuff that nobody talks about. It's like load in and like this person got too drunk, and just like whatever, the stories and all the just crazy shit that happened, and the van did this, and sorry we're late because this crazy dude, like blah blah blah, all that stuff factored in as well. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, from you being in the core of this thing for so long, granted, there's the bands who are out on the road and they're seeing everything, but then you being in a studio and you're in LA right now, and you have your spot in Boston still, right? Or in Maryland.
So actually, I'm in the Maryland location, and we relocated back here in 16. The LA chapter was about 10 years. My wife and I are both from the DC area, and we have three daughters, and we just like our whole family's here. We just wanted to raise them here, and I was really torn, obviously work wise, but it's all about my girls. So like we moved home really for family reasons. And then I just figured I had always kept the DC studio, and there's so much nostalgia here. There's so many great records that were made in that room that I was like, that's bound to happen again. I'm not going to worry about it. And that's what I've been really lucky to find that was a risk, and it worked. It has worked out the way I hoped it would. I didn't know if it would, but it has. So we've been back here since 16, and I made a concerted effort to come back to make sure that I was making music that I would have liked when I was a kid. And it's not to say that I'm not proud of everything that I've worked on in my career, but like I grew up wearing black shirts and black chucks and needing that from music. And so my hope was to get a little bit back in touch with that, to make sure that some kids who are 15 now and maybe don't feel like they fit the exact mold of whatever. I mean, I can imagine the pressures are even greater now that everything's visible on the internet and stuff like that, the social pressures. So that if you are one of those kids like me, you need music more than ever. So I wanted to get back to that feeling, and that's sort of what I focused on since moving back, and it's been really great. The first album back was Underoath, and that was a perfect for me. That was like a perfect record to like
Oh
make that
wow.
statement. It's cool. I learned all this stuff from all these pop gods and these amazingly talented, like holy crap people, but like the end of the day, I want to take some of that knowledge and give it to people who can help somebody feel like they've got what we got when we're talking about that community and talking about the bands that we loved, and that feeling of being at those shows. Under Oath is a great shining example of that whole ethic.
Well, tell me about that. Actually, I love Underoath, and when they came back with that record, and I mean, obviously, the biggest thing, which everyone's talking to them, they're like, "Oh my God, you guys are swearing now in your songs." I loved it because when they back in the day, Aaron, I remember seeing interviews with him. He was so like just seemed very not timid, but he wouldn't like it's like seeing him now. It seems like from back then till now, it looks like the behind the scenes, like he went through some shit or just like stopped giving a fuck. And it looked told you could see that now because like you see an interview, you're like, wow, he looks like he just doesn't care, meaning that's awesome. But I don't know where I'm going with this, but did you know those guys prior to doing that record? I didn't we don't have to talk about them the whole time, but like
No, but it's a really fun story because I didn't. We just all grew up like in this world, right? And so the funny thing is I didn't know them at all. We all know of each other. We have a million and one of the same friends. And I guess before Race Meet, they had other producers in the lead up. They had other producers lined up. Something happened. I never got that story, but as I understand it, and I'm pretty sure this is exactly what happened, is Gillespie called Randy Nichols and said, "What about Matt Squire? Where is he?" And Randy said, "I'll email him." Emailed me, and I was on the phone with the band the next day, and we had decided to make a record together pretty much the day after. And it was based on conversations that I had with Aaron, Speed, Tim, and Chris. A lot of it was about like bands that we loved, like Frodis and bands that I was sort of like, wow, like I can't believe this is what we're talking about
yeah,
today.
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like where it was kind of just like it's so amazing that Frodis were like heroes of yours. They're really good friends of mine growing up, and like heroes of mine too. So it, it's so funny because these days you don't book a record on faith like that. Like these days you audition sometimes, you vibe, you write together, you do a lot of stuff to like make sure it's a good fit for both sides, and there's this process. But that one was largely, hey, we all love the same stuff. We're kindred spirits. Like, let's just do it. That was really fun. It was really cool to know that music had such an impact on their lives too, and that because we trusted that in each other, it was kind of a no-brainer.
Well, that kind of goes back to the whole thing that we're talking about is like it going back to that time. There's such a it's like a time capsule that's in all of us that if you find someone from then, you just trust them automatically almost because it's like you lived it together and it wasn't like going to war. That's totally opposite. But this was you grew. It's like there's like a growing point. It was the very basis of when you're starting to grow and your brain is like you're looking for something. I know everyone I talk to, it's like I always feel like we were all looking for something and we didn't have a name to it. And once we walked in those Legion Hall doors, those club doors, we were like, oh my God, this is that shit that I was thinking about. And now I can see what it is. I can give it a fucking name.
100%.
So it's like we all fucking grew from there. So going back to then, you basically like when did you get involved? How old were you when you got involved in the scene, and like where was which scene was it? Like what state?
Yeah, so I'm really DC based, and so it's an interesting thing because there were two DC scenes. There was the DC like legendary punk, Minor Threat, Government Issue, Fugazi, Dag Nasty. There was that scene, and then there was the hardcore scene, which was Battery and Ashes and that world. I originally was about, I'd say at about age 11, that's when I started getting into vinyl and punk. And I had gotten into the Clash and Pistols. Some point, somebody gave me some Discord records. Somebody gave me, like, I think I got two GI records, two Government Issue records, and like maybe the first two Minor Threat, the LPs. And I was like, oh my God, like I didn't even know existed and it's local is amazing. The record store where you could get a lot of that stuff, Yesterday and Today Records, happened to be right down the street from my house. So I used to go in there, and I didn't realize it at the time, but Yesterday and Today Records, the owner, Skip, actually funded all the early Discord records. So what he would do is he would put up the money for Minor Threat or Teen Idols or Nation of Ulysses or whoever to record, and then the guys in the bands and the girls in the bands would work at Yesterday and Today Records to work off the advances. So Ian MacKaye actually worked at the store, and I used to go in 12 years old and ask Ian about why did you guys have X's on your hands and like the whole thing. And he used to talk to me, which is so cool. Like he'd spend a lot of time. Store was like, there'd be like two other people in the store. It was very laid back. And he would just talk to me for like forever. And it was really cool. Like it was so meaningful to have that access. You know what I mean? And what's amazing about their community is that Ian was right about how to deliver music in the modern age. He was just so ahead of his time. It was democratized, it was direct to fan, and you had access. And if you look at the world today, it's exactly what you have. You have a democratized music world where everybody can have access to whatever music they want. You have access to your favorite stars via social media. You can actually contact these people, and that's very different than when we grew up. And everything is direct to fan. It's all direct marketed, exactly how Discord was set up. So he's a great role model, and he was also correct about what music fans actually want from their artists, and it has turned into the model for the music business. So that was part of my entrance into the scene. And then when I met Brian McTernan, that was my entrance into the other part of that was more the hardcore scene. He was more embedded in the straight edge scene. He was already in Battery when I met him. I was in Battery briefly. I was introduced to Ken. We also had another project that we were doing together. And that's when I got immersed into the hardcore scene, which was so fascinating and such a great community, and more akin to the community we were talking about earlier in the conversation. But I just mentioned the Discord scene because that was my true, like, oh my God, what's going on in this town? It's amazing. Like, it's really cool. And then it was also just cool to get that firsthand. Jamie Canty worked at that store. So many other local legends worked at that store. So this is a great place to grow up, punk and hardcore.
So basically, you got to just talk to Ian MacKaye and ask him questions. So that was like your intro to the fucking punk scene. That's dope.
Pretty cool. And really cool of him because I talk about that all the time. It meant that much to me. Who knows how many kids that dude must have sort of advised or talked to in that same way, just by being cool, just by not being a rock star, just being like a good guy.
I wonder what he looks like when he's like listening to a song that he geeks out on. Like,
Yeah.
like is he still just like, because he looks like a serious guy, but I've seen him he did like not a TED talk, but he did some talk on YouTube and he's pretty funny. But you just see him and you see him as people put him up in this pedestal and they're like, oh my God, you can't talk to him, but you can talk to him. But I wonder if he like geeks out like on his own or, is like so uncool when he's listening to shit that he loves.
I bet he does. And it's a fun characterization of him. And it is fascinating how different he saw the whole thing. And it's also, on a lighter note, fascinating to see that he is ageless. I'm still waiting for the dude to age. Like, he just has always looked the same. It's crazy.
I say this all the time. It's like when people, if they like speak about themselves as they're old or as they're this thing that they're not or whatever, they become that and look a bit older. I think a lot of people who maybe found, not like fountain youth or a Peter Pan thing, but they found that thing that they love that keeps them younger. I think that actually that kind of or like keeps you from aging so much because you're just in it and you're like, yeah, I don't know, I'm just still the same youth vibe that I had for so many years. I think it's what keeps me from looking so decrepit or
I
older.
think there's something to it. I had a psychology professor in college who used to talk about something like that, and it makes sense to me what you're saying.
So growing up in DC, but then you went to college in Boston and at BU, right?
I did, yeah.
Okay, so when you did that, you had already been playing in bands prior to that and then kept it going, or is that when you started playing in bands?
So that was us keeping it going. So Ashes was my main band before that. That was me and McTernan, Elena Ritchie, and Jack Radner. We played from my ninth grade year through that first year in Boston, although we kind of all ended up in different places freshman year of college, that first year in Boston. So that was sort of when we disbanded, or it sort of just stopped working for us. But Ashes was really really fun because it was not hardcore in the traditional sense. We had Elena singing most of the vocals, but then Brian also screaming along. So it was this juxtaposition of melody and more traditional hardcore sounds. It was really a unique band in that way. So it was really fun. It was really formative, and I think powerful. We got to play all those More Than Music festivals in Dayton. We got to travel the country. We played in LA and went out and played with Outspoken, and like was just an amazing start. And there were a lot of, there were a lot more melodic bands popping up at that time. So we played with Field, we played with Farside, and it was becoming more accepted to bring melody in to what we were doing and to grow. And that was a really exciting time to be part of the scene musically because people were embracing sounds that were not traditional, and it was really fun. So Ashes was the main thing, and then when we moved to Boston, we started a different band. Brian and I started a band called Miltown, and that was our band for the next 3 years.
What year was that?
So I'm thinking that was probably 95-ish.
I think that was the band that that Gorman referenced in the Orange Island interview.
For sure, because Milltown and Orange Island were kindred spirits, played a lot of shows together, and we were just the closest of friends.
Like, how big did Milltown get? Was it like kind of a pretty big Boston band?
So yeah, I mean, and bands in Boston, it's a microcosm. It's not necessarily reflective of what's going on nationally at that time. Like there were bands that were big in Boston that were only big in Boston. So we quickly became part of that scene. We weren't one of the biggest bands in Boston by any stretch.
But you're like Drexels and all that were.
I love Drexel. Yeah, I loved all that stuff, and that was kind of the level. There was some ties to earlier bands, like our singer Jonah was in a band called Only Living Witness that was really successful and was one of the big bands in Boston in their time. Milltown was his project after, and it was me and Brian's project after Ashes. It did quickly become at least celebrated because we were in previous bands that people liked, and people liked the new incarnation as well. It was a lot of fun for me because in Ashes I played drums, Milltown I played guitar, and I'm traditionally a guitar player, so it was nice for me to be able to do something different.
So when you were doing this, and were you going to school for music?
Yeah, not for music, but I was in school. I was at BU. I went there for psychology.
Are you still kind of figuring out what you want to do at that point? Was it a weight on your shoulders of trying to figure out, or are you just kind of living like, just kind of going with the flow?
I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do in my life when I grow up, to be honest.
I mean, like, at least, you've done quite the roster of amazing fucking things, which we can talk about later.
I'll let you know when I figure out what I want to do when I grow up, though.
That's hilarious. That's pretty hilarious.
Yeah, it was weird. Like, I think that at that time, I just assumed what would happen was that I would have fun being a musician for a few years, and that I would work psychology in the background, which is what I was doing. And then at, my 30s, that the psych would kind of take over, and that's what my path was. I didn't know you could make money to support a family as a musician, and very few people can. So I feel really grateful for it. And it's a real blessing. We support 3 kids. My wife's a really talented artist, and I do music, and that's our story, and that's our kids' story. So it's pretty incredible. But yeah, at that time in Boston, to your point, I was trying to figure it out, and I was not worried about it. I was just kind of like, yeah, whatever. I'm gonna enjoy this, and then at a certain point, I'll get a real job in psych, and that was the plan. Maybe it still is.
Did you kind of, so a lot of people, I mean, myself included, have this thing where you're looking to do something and it's a direction you want to go in, and you keep trying things, and as you're doing it, you're like, this just isn't working. This isn't working. Did you ever have that when you were doing the bands, and then later on we'll talk about doing producing music and everything and recording? Did you ever have a point when you were doing something and being like, this just isn't going where I want to, or did you just not ever think like that?
No, for sure I did. And I was in Boston at that time. Milltown had broken up. I was doing a band where I was the singer called Long Distance Runner, which is a lot of fun. Great people in that band. but there was something daunting about it for the first time. There was something like in my head that was like, wow, this is like a lot of work. I'm like the singer and it's a lot of stress. It was like a lot of stuff that like, is this going to be like on a major label like Miltown was? Like we got signed to Warner Brothers. There's like new pressures and new expectations to live up to, and a lot of stuff that I had never wanted to care about. And I did feel like pretty weird about it. And then I started self recording. And then quickly that turned into friends of mine in Boston being like, hey, can you record us? To your question, like when I started recording other bands, it like bam, like it just took off like with an electricity that I was not finding in my own guitar playing songwriting pursuits at that time. And so it was a weird moment where I was going like I have these moments at certain crossroads in my life where everything that I'm trying to do on the surface, whether it's be in a band or be a record producer or whatever, it looks like it's working. It's almost working. I almost have the big hit. I almost have the record deal or like whatever, but it's not like 100% right. And then there is something that I pivot to that like is the thing and it feels perfect and it feels like it clicks and it feels like it works. I've always felt like that was like the universe giving me a nudge. Like just being like, dude, of course you can keep doing this band, but like this other thing with the record production, like that's a pretty cool move for you. I feel like that's what the universe was like telling me at that time.
Yeah.
I
Fuck
just like
yeah.
rolled with it.
Well, some people would fight that because they're like, well, no, this isn't going the direction I want. But I think sometimes the people just kind of let go and just kind of, surrender to it. They're like, oh, this actually is working out for me pretty well for the next
I've met
couple
both.
decades.
It's fascinating because I've always envied the people who are like, this is what I'm gonna do, and nothing will get in my way, and they're like bulldozers, and they say things to people and do things, but I'm like, oh my God, you really did push that person out of the way, and you got exactly what you wanted. Wow, that's amazing. It's not been me, I've been more like, I am waiting for the universe to give that nudge and go like, just find the right friend or like whatever it is, like then I'd definitely be happy. Like, but you might not. You kind of have to wait to see like, no, this actually makes me happy. This activity or this group of people or like this town or like whatever. Like you kind of have to like that's like a real gut thing. And I've always believed in that.
Yeah, actually, it almost sounds like there's two paths, right? There's the people. And as soon as you said that, there's the people that bulldoze through. Just a few people popped up in my brain. I'm like, yeah, yep, that's that person, that's that person. Because I think sometimes people get that gut instinct of that universal thing, and they go, oh, it's as clear as day. I'm going after that, and that's happened with me so many times in my life. And then there's other times where I'm like, I don't really know, but you kind of let go, and you're like, I'll kind of let the ride take me instead of trying to, captain the ship. But I think if people let go too, they can get going that direction. I think it's the people who are going, I need to go in this direction, and it's like, well, you're not gonna. It's like, but they're not 100% sure. That's when they're fucked, and then just kind of just swirling around, just depressed and mad all the time.
I agree, and I've seen those. I've seen it also work, and that they knew what they wanted, and they went out and got it, and it did make them happy, and they were right. And of course, I envy that. But I've also seen the nightmare, which is people who have been so driven to pursue this one thing that they thought was the destination, and then they get there, and it wasn't fulfilling, and they of course can't admit it to themselves, and it's so rough to see that because I'm like, man, you're like on top of the world, you got the money, you got the fame or whatever it is you were seeking, and I can tell you're miserable. That was my LA lesson, because as a kid growing up in DC in the scene that we grew up in, for me when Panic blew up and I was listening to it on the radio against all this pop music, I was like, I have to go. I have to go pursue this. Like this is the universe giving me a nudge to chase something bigger for a second, to chase something more mainstream. and I'm glad I did it. I was really thankful I did it. It was a lot of fun to do, but the I was so surprised, so I wouldn't say disillusioned with LA or, unpleasantly surprised or anything like that because it's all subjective. But my experience wasn't what I thought it was going to be. The community of like Hollywood executives, artists, management, all that stuff, like I met some amazing people, but it was not the broy scene that you and I know. You know what I mean? It was just not that. It was it was really, really disconcerting to a certain extent where I was just like, wow, like there are different perspectives on how we're supposed to be making music. There are people that I'm going to run into that don't understand my sort of go with the flow vibey, like that's not going to work in every situation. Like, oh man. And then a lot of celebrities that I worked with, a lot of great musicians that I worked with, great songwriters, like, were not happy. They were miserable and they were really wealthy. And I was like, oh man, like this dream of Sunset Strip and LA and like all the glamour and all the romanticizing that I had done as a kid, like reading Hit Parader and, sort of like the pre-hardcore years when I was like just really into like, oh my God, these guys are rock stars. Like this must be amazing. It wasn't. If we full circle it and we look at sort of like my early experiences talking to people like Ian and getting that punk rock ethos really embedded in my spirit kind of saved me from falling into the Los Angeles thing because I was like, there is another way. There is another version of being in music and being in a healthier spot and actually having it be a happy one.
Well, I think the thing is, I always think of LA as just, I mean, LA is just really empty. I lived there and lived there for a couple of years ago, and I lived there again, and it was kind of oh, this is why you don't you don't date the person you broke up with. Like you see really, you see really quickly, like, oh, this is why it didn't work.
It's so funny. Yeah, the mental math works a lot faster the second time.
Oh, totally. I mean, I think the first time I was in LA, I was there for 2.5 years when I turned, what was I was 22 when I'd moved out there, and I moved back 2.5 years later. And then I went back there when I was 36, and I was only there for about 2 months, like a month and a half. And I just knew really quickly, I was like, oh yeah, this is why I'm not fucking staying here, because I was traveling around. But I think the comparison is that in this scene, you go to this, the scene was, what can I give to it? And I think there's places like LA, not to shit on people who live in LA right now, but that city fucking blows. So it's more of like, what can I get from it? And when you go with that mentality of what am I gaining, what am I gaining, and then you start gaining things, there is an emptiness to it because it's not fulfilling anything. But when you're giving to something, you're even in the moment of giving to it, you feel like you're getting something out of it, like the shows back in the day, or just being a part of the scene back in the day. Whatever you brought to it, even if you just showed up to support a band, like you felt good, and because it was of energy that was being created. And I think when you have that and you understand that, that's what's going to make you feel less empty. And I feel like you understood that. So when you move to LA, you're kind of like, I mean, you might have seen it the same way. I mean, this is just a theory of mine, but I think maybe what's going on is everyone was just draining from everyone, and you're going to like, oh, I don't understand what's happening here. Like, why isn't everyone just excited about this? And like, what are you? Because you're given all this shit, and that's the whole point.
100%. And look, at the end of the day, what I think is part of the secret to everything is like I kind of want to have fun. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
totally.
And I think we all like as humans we all share that. I think we're all kind of seeking like things that are really fun. Nothing was more fun than a Saturday matinee, at St. Stephen's or whatever. Just like nothing was more fun. It was the best, and you see all your friends, and you're like, it was always a given that this person was going to show up, and that you didn't know when. You're definitely bound to see everybody by the end of the show, and it was just awesome. And like kids would travel from different towns. Oh, the Jersey kids are coming down, or like we're going up to Middlesex, or like it was just fun. And I think in LA, like I think what was so like weird for me is I think that fun is what makes great music, what creates like memorable hits and stuff like that. Like I don't know if it's as formulaic. You know what I mean? I think it's that spirit of like we were in the studio, we were joking around, and all of a sudden somebody played this guitar part, and I was like, "That's dope." It's fun, and it's supposed to be. I was in a lot of sessions in LA that were not fun, and then the ones that were fun were more hangs, and that was a real problem too, because it's like then we got nothing done, and so it was like this weird like what did we actually accomplish this month? I didn't like how it was either I could like have it be fun, but then everybody has basically unplugged because they're chilling and you're not going to get a song, or you're like under pressure and you're like need a single and you like have about 86 different producers and writers you could go to that are all good and that are all bankable. There's something like it wasn't just about the commerce of it. I was just kind of like, do people really think this is gonna work? Like it's not gonna work. Like you're not gonna make a great product pursuing it with this surgical methodology. The one community I will say that turned me on my head, and it's interesting because there's a connection to what we're talking about. But when I was able to spend time around Max Martin and the Swedish pop songwriters, I was around Max's camp for 2 years, and I got to work with him, and I got to work with a lot of writers that he signed. There's an element of fun to that community, and there's an element of when they make pop music for America, there's an element of them being condescending and them sort of poking fun at us that was tremendously fun. It is tongue in cheek to a certain extent. 'Cause Swedish pop music doesn't sound like that. They write in what they feel is a dumbed down manner for our culture. So they were terrific fun. And the connection point is that those guys are all metalheads. Those guys, like Max loves In Flames and shit like that. Like those and Shellback, like those guys are all really into metal. So it's kind of like us, where like we came up listening to way heavier music, and then as it evolved into more melodic stuff, we're incorporating all these other elements and whatnot. They're coming from a similar place, and they're bringing a similar like metal or punk rock mentality to what they're doing. The difference is that in Sweden, you can get a grant from the government to work in the children's music industry, and then they'll take care of you for years after that.
What? That's so weird.
Yeah, that's how they all learn how to write those melodies. They learn it in there's a big children's music industry in Sweden. And so to get a grant in that their socialist nation, like you can live as a musician for quite a bit of your adult life off the stipend you get from the government. And the way to qualify for the program, as I understand it, is that you do 3 years in the children's music industry. And so that's how they learned how to do all that stuff. That was the one community that I felt were very kindred to ours. Max also, just like Ian MacKaye, Max had a flat rate for everything he did. It's exorbitantly expensive, but it's a flat rate. It's just pay me this. This is the publishing that I always get. This is the fee that you always get for me. Like, it's not a hustle. I just don't want to deal with business. I just want to make your music. The process is the exact same for everybody. It's totally, taken care of by somebody else, so I can just focus on your song. He's very much that way.
I like that. Yeah, I think that's the best way to go. I can get away with that myself from doing just videos. If people come to me like, what do you charge for this? You give me a quote. I was like, yeah, this is my flat rate. It just makes like life so much easier. I mean, granted, I'm not charging millions of dollars. Like, I'm not making pop songs or anything like that, but
But the thing is video is very, very difficult. And so if you're spending half the time that you're supposed to be creative dealing with invoicing and dealing with chasing, then you could compromise your work. And so I find it just gets everybody out of the way and gets everything out of the way.
Yeah, it's like super concrete too and just streamlined. So you're like, it makes it easy on them too. They're like, oh wow, that was simple. You're like, yeah, everything else, it's just live in this bubble and you got to be creative still. So you're still creating something from scratch, whatever it's going to be.
100%.
Yeah, like when you're going to write a song or create a song or an album or something like that, it's not like it's you just follow the same structure. Of course, you gotta. There's the structure of setting up the board and all the crazy. I don't even know the terms anymore because it's been so different since the last time I've been in the studio. You gotta have like that stuff is foundation, but other than that, I mean, creativity is just. I don't know. I don't know how people can just be like, oh yeah, that we just kind of follow this thing. You're like this. It's got to just kind of pop out of nowhere and just. I don't know.
It's a it's a combination. That's what I've learned over the years. It's like I used to only believe in the spontaneity, you know what I mean, and only trust what happened from a spontaneous, like inspired moment. And then
And then
I
you had
would say,
deadlines.
I was unwilling to refine for years and years and years. It made me uncomfortable because I was really uh, truthfully uncomfortable messing with something that I thought came from an inspired place. It's like it's like, man, that melody popped in my head. I have no idea where it came from. We just don't know. It's special. And so I always felt weird about it, and I always felt like you're messing with something pure. And that again, that notion was challenged when I met the Swedes because they have the same amount of that inspiration. The same thing happens. They sing a voice note and go, oh, that one's good. You know what I mean? The difference was in the work that was put in after was so much more exhaustive and so much more involved. And the standard was so much higher for what you do after that inspiration that really changed my thinking on, is it okay to tweak something that came in that way? And it really is okay. And actually, the melodies that I've written since and the things that I've been a part of since will probably mean more to other people because we got some things right and we tidied some things up and we spent that extra time to go like, maybe that melody be more memorable if we did it like this, and that there's nothing wrong with there being a nugget of inspiration and then a whole lot of perspiration after.
Can you look at your catalog and see where you learned that, and then afterwards you see just this explosion of
100%. It's interesting. Like, I think the turning point for me on that particular like refining was when I was working on like Ariana Grande and like One Direction albums where it was necessary, if I'm being like really honest, because in my earlier emo records, it was not as pressured, was not as it was a looser time, and we were really in a stylistic moment. There was something that we were doing that other people didn't know how to do, and so we have a lot of liberty in terms of traditional song structure, and traditional melodic structure. When I got into situations where it was like, hey, that's cool, we want all that stuff too for Ariana, but we also want these memorable classics that people are going to sing for the rest of their lives. And the key emphasis is on that singability. Like, is this going to be a classic? That's when I started challenging myself to be like, are there other things that I need to learn? Are there other ways that these experts attack these challenges where you can't the songs on the radio they did come from some sort of inspiration, right? It's like you can't have something memorable that doesn't have that component, in my opinion. But then there was just this whole other level of craftsmanship that I was not aware of that was going into it. So I would say somewhere I got to work on the first 1D album. I executive produced Ariana's first album. I was working with Demi Lovato at the time, and it was weird. I was in this weird, unique position where I was working with Selena Gomez, and his Infernal Majesty, like at the same time. You know what I mean? Like,
Jesus.
and like the Selena sessions were in the morning and him was in the afternoon. It was just weird, and like, so I just got to do these unique things and learn these unique lessons. But really at that time it became like there's something going on with melody that I'm missing that I want to learn. There was being around Max and being around those melody gods. It was kind of like you got no choice. Like it's too much of a fascination. You gotta know what they're talking about. It's so fascinating, and dude, it's so metal. It's like it's their approach is so metal. It's like a certain mathematical formula for how many notes go up, how many notes go down, how many are long, how many are short, what register is the chorus in versus the pre. If the pre starts on the one, maybe the chorus should have a lead in. If the chorus starts on the one, maybe the pre should start on two. The only people that I know who talk like that are hardcore kids and metal dudes. And the approach for Swedish pop is the exact same thing. It's really cool, really fascinating.
I feel like you could geek out with like Ben from Dillinger about this shit.
Absolutely. And what would actually be interesting is that like somebody like Max Martin and Shellback could actually geek out with Ben from Dillinger, and they would have like a really productive conversation, and it would and that's the weird stuff that I got to see. The unique fly on the wall that I've been is like I'm like seeing connection points where people wouldn't normally see them, and it's just because I've been immersed in all these different worlds.
Did you have anyone that you recorded? I know we got a short amount of time, but did you ever anyone recorded where they knew about your past in the scene, or you brought up some old band that you liked and they were like, "Oh, I fucking love that band," and you're like, "You got to be kidding me."
100%. Yeah, I was just in with Rookie of the Year. Ryan's an old hardcore kid, and we just went right down memory lane. It was so cool, and we didn't know that about each other previous to working together. And it does happen all the time. I mean, we mentioned Underoath earlier in the conversation. It happened at that time too, and it really, like you said, there's like a beacon of trust right away when you link up with somebody like that. Where you're like, oh, you probably got maced at a church too, when you were 15. Like, I know your world. You know what I mean? Like, it's instantly like, oh, did you do graffiti too? Or like, what's up?
Did you and this is like going back to the Milltown thing, which is going so opposite of because you were talking about like Ariana Grande and shit, but the days when you're in Milltown and you're in Boston, was it weird? Because you had mentioned I didn't know you guys were on Warner Brothers with that band.
Yeah, so it was a division of Warner, and it was run by Irving Azov.
So like when this is happening, you guys are kind of getting you're blowing up and stuff. You're in the Boston scene. Was it weird to be living there? And because this is the time that like what year was that?
I think that would have been 96 through 98, I believe.
So it seems that this is the time where Cave In, Piebalds, like all these bands, they're in the area, they're starting to blow up, and but then a lot of these guys are all working at was it Big Burrito and Newbury Comics, and that's where Cave In is. Right? So is it weird to be in the scene and you guys are starting to kind of get name recognition and you're popping up in these popular zines and you're going to like Newbury Comics or Big Burrito or just a place around town and seeing each other being like, hey, this is cool. Like we all know what's going on here. Did that happen?
Yeah, I think it did, and I worked at Strawberries, which is a record store. That was the record store in Kenmore Square, and so every once in a while somebody would pop in and maybe recognize me from a show or something like that, and it's a great feeling. You know what I mean? Like for me, like to be back in any capacity. It's not like Strawberries is anything like Yesterday and Today Records where Ian and Danny Ingram worked and all that stuff, but like for me to be able to just have a couple small moments like that was always cool. And I always remembered that if somebody walked in and recognized me, that like I had that access to my favorite musicians in that same way. And so just always try and be cool and always gracious, and like it's cool that kids feel emboldened to like come up to you and stuff like that. It's rad.
So I know we gotta wrap it up soon, but and this is obviously I wouldn't say it's a deep cut because it was in the interview I did pretty recently with Dave, but he was talking about when they recorded you guys in the studio was completely freezing.
So I'm not sure.
He said that they were recording, I forget which album. I think it was the first album they did, and in the studio there was no heat, so you guys were like freezing the whole time.
I wonder if that was the Beltsville studio before I owned it, like when it was still Brian's.
Yeah, I don't remember. It just seemed like it was just a funny story because that band just kept getting just shit on by just the universe all the time.
That's definitely true. So it definitely makes sense to me, but I don't remember that specific thing. But you got to understand, that house was built in 1929. That house has had every issue under the sun and continues to this day. So nothing would ever shock me about it. It's the studio. It just sounds awesome. That drum room sounds killer, and I recorded in every drum room in LA, and I never beat it. It's so awesome, and it's such a vibe, and now so many crazy bands have recorded there, over time, that it becomes this charmed place, and there's just so much great punk stuff that's gone through there. It's punk rock, you know what I mean? And Gormo, if you can't handle it, bro, it's man, like just gotta put on an extra layer, man. But yeah, I mean, I think it must have, if the AC was out and he was freezing, then it must have been hard to sing. I can only imagine, or the heat was out rather than the AC. But yeah, I mean, you gotta have a certain amount of whatever to sing, so I totally get it.
Yeah, he was telling me that like you were in the studio like years after this, or like Panic at the Disco when they're recording their first record, and you're like to call him or text him or whatever was the time. You're like, dude, like I've never heard anything like this, but this band is gonna be fucking gigantic.
I had a good feeling about them. Gigantic for me at that time meant like maybe we would sell 10,000 records, and that was our goal.
Jesus.
And the Fall Out Boy had just started to break, and one of Pete's first business moves was starting a record label so he could sign Panic. We didn't think this is going to be like some big thing. We thought it will be a big thing in the punk rock world. It'll be impactful because it's attached to Pete. And then, the record came out and we sold 10,000 the first week.
Jesus Christ.
And we were all like, oh my God. Like, we were all blown away. Like, none of us expected that. I still can't believe it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm still like, I can't believe we had this like huge for like a year and a half. Like, that album just sold and sold and sold and sold. And it was the album 2006 and 7 when Panic was selling. Albums still sold for $15.99. So like, I mean, we were Billboard top 3 for. I mean, it's crazy. That was just. There's no way to describe it. It was such a surreal experience, and it was only like I had only done a handful of full lengths at that time, so it was like very, very young in my production knowledge. I had no clue what I was doing. The band didn't know what they were doing. I think to a certain extent, that's what helped us make that record because they had not played any shows.
I know. I heard that rumor that they had never even played a show before that album came out.
Yeah, and at first I was like giving them shit for it because I thought it was funny. And then over the years, I really came to appreciate it because they were so ambitious because they didn't have those rules of this will work live or this will go over well. That aptitude just wasn't there. There were no rules making that record, and that's what made it so special. They had a lot of like meaning to the songs, Ryan wrote a lot of those lyrics, and they were personal, and they were deep, and they were from family issues, and like he was really, really like laid a lot out, which I think gave it all heart. And then from the rest, it was like, yeah, let's play tuba on this because fuck it. Like the studio that we recorded at was actually not the Orange Island studio. And it was not, it was down the street because McTurnan was still in that one. So Panic, the studio was attached to a drum rental place that also rented band instruments, oboes and stuff like that.
Okay.
And they were so cool. They would let us knock on the door and like borrow stuff for an hour or two. That's why we were able to put all those weird instruments on the Panic record. It really became its own beast at that time. So, really special project. We had no clue, like zero clue. If I called Gorman and said it was going to be big, I meant a sliver of what it turned into.
Jeez. That's crazy. The whole point of this podcast was to kind of spotlight the late it is to spotlight the late 90s because after that I got disillusioned personally going into the 2000s because the sound changed and it became like a glamour show for a hot minute, which was just so gross to me. And then but then I also found that I liked those bands later on in life, like you recorded New Again with Take Back Sunday, and I love Take Back Sunday, but I hated them in the beginning because I was like, ew, they represent this gross shit. So from you to be in the scene and then to start making records and producing things like, and then going in these waves where it was our scene and then going into the 2000s up until now, was there ever a point where you started to get disillusioned because of it becoming maybe too much of a glamour show?
It's interesting. Like I would say honestly, and all those sentiments are valid, right? Because we saw some behaviors that we didn't expect to see from friends.
And also, real quick, this is like me talking as 22-year-old me. Like 42-year-old me doesn't give a shit, but 22-year-old me is like,
No, of course, and I 100% get it. And I had seen and felt a lot of similar ways. The thing for me is like at the end of the day, like my degree's in psych, so I find everything fascinating, no matter what's going on. Like, not that I even really care about, my psych degree, blah blah. But I'm just saying, like, my perspective is just a fascination. Like, I'm just like I'm fascinated with behaviors and why do people do what they do and act how they act. So for me, I was taking in a lot of different stuff where I'm going, well, this artist is behaving or making music in a way that I wouldn't have expected, and that I might be disappointed with this one, but this other artist just came out of nowhere, and I'm like, oh my god, they're amazing. You know what I mean? Like it was a really weird time, and I think looking back at it, there was just so much. There was so much being made, so many more bands popping up, so much more content being made. It's it is interesting because that's sort of we're in that again now. The sound is coming back again. At least sort of my wave of modern emo has come back. I have songs that I made 15 years ago that are bigger than they've ever been now because TikTok has embraced them, and it's a very interesting time. And I'm seeing a similar parallel where I'm going, well, some people are behaving in ways that like I wouldn't have expected, and then some people are coming out with stuff that I'm like, I don't care where you came from, that's dope. Like this is amazing. Like, and you would never have done this if the sound wasn't popular right now. You would never have made this song that might save somebody's life if our style wasn't in vogue at the moment. So it's kind of this like double-edged sword. But yeah, there were points where the shorter answer is yes. There were points at which either friends of mine or bands that I loved disappointed me or made surprising moves that I didn't anticipate.
Interesting. That's really interesting. All right, man. Well, I'll ask you questions and I'll let you go. What would you like to plug? It could be something about you're doing, or it could be something about a friend's doing, or it could be both.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, for me, like, it's just been a crazy year. So, there's three new ventures that I started this year. One's called Entangled Audio. This is technology for ultra low latency collaboration. I've made a ton of records online in the past year and a half, and I never skipped a beat. I had been obsessed with online collaboration since about 20, 2014. And so when COVID hit, I had tools and I was able to get back to work within a day. And I was able to also help a lot of my friends get back online as well. And so the tech is nifty, and we didn't realize, me and a couple of partners who built the stuff did not realize that we were building something that nobody really had. And so we are productizing that and launching it. So it's called Entangled Audio. And you can just find us at entangledaudio.com and just check out some of the nifty things, some of the fun party tricks that we're trying to pull off. It's been really, really fun, and my partner's really great. And then just started my own record label. There will be more announced about that as things roll out. But I just started my own imprint, and great partners there, and just signed my first artist. I also started my own social token, which is a cryptocurrency coin called Emo Coin. That's a lot of fun too. And I was talking to a buddy of mine, and we were really just joking around. And I was hearing some ventures that they had been in. They were talking about crypto and these social tokens, and maybe you should have one, blah blah. And I'm like, let's call it Emo Coin. And then, something like that starts as a funny conversation, then it ends up snowballing
Oh
into
my
this thing.
God.
So we launched, and it's been really, really fun. And I mean, crypto's a world that is starting to legitimize to a certain extent. So Emo Coin actually is tied to this platform called Rally, which is Ethereum. So it's rooted in pretty good with crypto. So it's a serious thing, I guess. And it's a funny name. But
Amazing.
it's been an exciting ride so far.
That's hilarious. I was like, I'm on Robinhood trying to find it, but I guess it's not. You said it's not there.
Yeah, it's on the Rally platform, rally.io. And if let me know if you go there, you can make an account. It's pretty easy sign on process, but let me know if you need any help.
Yeah, I actually just found you online. All right, last question. What scene ethics do you hold on to this day?
It's a great question, and really, a lot of it we sort of actually covered without meaning to, which is I really honestly think that like our scene and the punk rock scenes that we looked up to and the people that we aspired to be, like the Ian MacKays, like we got it right. Like music is supposed to be artist to fan, and you know it was it was not until One Direction retaught me that lesson, and taught the world that lesson with Twitter, because they were I was told that it was only going to be big in the UK, and I still went over to work on it, and we had a tremendous amount of fun, but I was told it would only be big there and that nobody would ever hear about them in the States. But the boys in the band had been direct messaging through Twitter their American fans for 9 months, forever, for like months. And nobody knew what Twitter was. And Simon and all these amazing people had no idea what was going on. So the band comes over, they get this opportunity to play Good Morning America, and I get a call from a friend of mine in New York, and she said, did you work on One Day? And I say, yeah. I said, great fun, and it was really, it was a blast, blah, blah. And she said, well, I can't get to work. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, they just shut down Times Square. There's so many kids here. And they did that all by themselves. Nobody at the label knew that was going to happen. Nobody knew that was going to happen except for the fans. And overnight, it was the same exact thing. And I was reminded tremendously of our world, of our scene, where it's like, dude, it's more powerful than labels. It's more powerful than marketing. It's more powerful than anything. It's like, if you have that genuine connection with your fan, that is the whole thing in music. So, I feel like I've been able to carry that with me just because we were right. because if we had gotten it wrong, there would be nothing to hold on to. But we had it right then, and I've watched it turn into the only model for the music business. And so I've been able to carry that with me, from my own ethic, but also just like from watching it be the correct way to quote unquote sell music.